It's really good to see you. Appreciate your being here this morning. And James. My computer's been acting up this morning, which has not filled me with joy. Dave, you might get that set up so that I can use it up there. Okay? My computer just decided to die on me, which it's been doing today. Am I up there, Dave? I usually give Dave a backup of my sermons, and how frustrating. Phooey. Dave, let me know when you're up. There we are. Tale of Two Pharaohs. Dave's going to run this for me up there, and I think we'll survive, and I'll speak sharply to my computer later and get it to work. I'm going to get it out of the way. What's a pharaoh? Do you kids know what a pharaoh is? What? A pharaoh. Not a favor, a pharaoh. I don't pronounce very well. What's a pharaoh? Huh? Nathan, you had your hand up. What's a pharaoh? A boss. There you go. Well, that's sort of true. Max, I see you trying to look that up on your phone. What's a pharaoh? Max has a new phone. He thinks that all the answers are there. A pharaoh was a king. It was an Egyptian king. That's what they called their kings. It's called them pharaohs. And there's a whole bunch of them that went back. But this morning, we want to talk about two pharaohs. Call this lesson A Tale of Two Pharaohs. And we're going to primarily be in two Old Testament books. So if you guys want to look it up, the first one we're going to be in is the book of Exodus. And we're going to talk about Pharaoh and Moses, because Moses had to deal. That's one of the things that you were reading about there just a moment ago. James read to you from the book of Acts about some of the things that went on here in Exodus. And there was, in this particular instance, a bad Pharaoh. We can call him a bad Pharaoh. There you go, Dave. Catch up with me if you can. There are a number of reasons why he might be described as a bad Pharaoh. First of all, he didn't know Moses, or he didn't know Joseph. We don't know whether he was not taught who Joseph was. After all, it had been 300 or 400 years before this Pharaoh appeared, or whether he had forgotten. You know, a busy man, you'd forget something 400 years ago. For instance, Max, do you know when Columbus sailed the ocean blue? Yep, look on that phone again. 1492, you're supposed to know that. Columbus, and it'd be easy to forget, wouldn't it? If you didn't have your phone with you, it'd be easy to forget. Maybe he forgot, or maybe he just ignored it. It's in Exodus 1 and verse 6. Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. See, I told you, Pharaoh was a king. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. They had multiplied so much. He said, Hey, we're about to be overcome by these folks. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also under our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. They were worried, hey, these guys are producing too fast. You know, we worry about that in the good old U.S. of A. Did you know that? There are white folks, I've heard white folks say, hey, the black people are producing more children than we are. And the brown people, the Mexicans, Spanish people, are producing more children than we are. They're going to eventually outnumber us. Ooh, what will we do then? That's some of our racial problems. They were having that problem back in Egypt, too. He says, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters, to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. They were having kids, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. You know, I must, excuse me, I shouldn't tell you this, but I'm going to. I saw a meme the other day, one of those things on Facebook, where some fellow had always wondered what in the world that his great-grandparents did without, or his grandparents, what they did without phones and computers and television. And he said, I think I'll ask my 28 brothers and sisters what they did back then. Okay, they multiplied. The more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved. They were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the field. All their service, wherein they made them serve, was with rigor. It was hard. They gave them hard work. You know, every now and then you get that light work of, you know, lifting feathers. But then you get those concrete blocks, and that's a whole different ball game. He didn't fear God as he chose how to live. Unlike the godly people around him. There were godly people around him. The king of Egypt, this is verse 15 of this Exodus 1. You following along with me on that phone, Max? You got a Bible program out of that phone. I know you do. Are you with me, Nathan? Good. Look at verse 15, Exodus 1:15. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives. Oh, now there's a word you don't know. Do you know what a midwife is? No. Do you know what a midwife is? No. What? No, that's not it. That sound you're thinking though. I'm glad to see that. Where did you remember when Naomi back there was born? Where was she born? Where was she born? She was born in a hospital, wasn't she? There was a doctor and nurses and everybody around. Well, you know, back years ago, they didn't have hospitals. They didn't have doctors much. And they didn't have nurses. What they had was a midwife. And that was a woman who went around when ladies were going to have babies. They were very experienced, and they would help with the delivery of the baby. They were midwives. We're going to read about, well, we're not going to get to it, but I'm going to tell you about something else while we're here. But we'll get to it in just a minute, and then I'll tell you about it. He spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah. And he said, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, that is, when they help them birth their children, and see them upon the stools. Now, you know, we're very ungodly in the way we do our births. These women are laying in a bed. Well, these folks they sat on a stool to give birth. And they found it was very easy that way. People have different customs in different places. If it be a son, then ye shall kill him. You're going to kill the baby if it's a boy. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them. Now the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, he was ungodly. He was going to kill the babies. But the midwives feared God. They weren't going to do that. We could learn a lot about that in our society today because we have a lot of people killing babies. But save the men children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said unto them, Why have ye done this thing? And have saved the men children alive. And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women. They told a fib. For they are lively and delivered ere the midwives come to them. Said they gave birth to these babies before we could get there. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And Pharaoh charged all of his people, saying, Every son that is born ye shall throw in the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. Well, wouldn't that mean killing babies? Wouldn't that be terrible? He was ungodly. But he also, Dave got ahead of me here, he had no compassion for other people. Couldn't sympathize with them. Unlike his daughter. Now this is, I want you to see this. There went a man of the house of Levi and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived. This is in chapter 2, verse 1 of Exodus. And the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him, that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. She didn't want anybody throwing her baby in the river. And when she could no longer hide him, he got too big and too loud. You've heard babies cry, right? Too loud. She could no longer hide. She took for him an ark of bulrushes. They'd float. And dabbed it with slime and with pitch so water wouldn't get in, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Would you do that? You wouldn't stay to see what's going to happen to your brother who's been floating on the river? I think you would. His sister stood afar off. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river. And her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark amid the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. He was crying. And she had compassion on him and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children that her father had ordered killed. Her father didn't care about him. He's willing to kill him. But the daughter had compassion. She couldn't kill the baby. She wasn't going to dump the ark out and throw him in the river. You know, there's something else. I told you about midwives. I'm going to tell you about something else. Max, you and Maddie are old enough. You know when your sister was born, Lexi? Did your mother nurse him? She fed him? Well, this woman hadn't had a baby, the Pharaoh's daughter, and so she couldn't nurse her child. And so what the sister came running up. We're not going to read that, but it's right following this. The sister came running up and said, Would you like for me to find a nurse for him? And she said, yes. And she went and got the baby's mother because the mother could nurse him. And that, years ago, was called a wet nurse. You know, you probably remember your mom getting bottles and all that sort of thing in addition to nursing him or after maybe she got tired of nursing him or decided to change things around. Well, that didn't happen years ago, so you had to have a wet nurse. Now, my mother, some of you remember my mother. My mother had a midwife who came out to their house when my mother was born. And it was a very hard birth. And so my grandmother couldn't nurse my mother. So what did they do? They got another lady from the community who had a baby, and she could nurse her baby, and my mother too. She was a wet nurse, but because she had milk in her breast. And that's what they got for Moses. But what I wanted you to see is that this daughter had compassion, and Pharaoh didn't. He was an evil man. We can go to the next point we want to see here, Dave. He was illogical. You know, this doesn't make a lick of sense what he was doing. He killed off. He had a tremendous workforce that was building his cities, raising his crops. And he started killing off all the men. He was killing off this enormous workforce. In verse 16, which we've already read of chapter 1, if it be a son, ye shall kill him. If it be a daughter, keep her alive. He was an evil man. Hard, bitter, not compassionate at all. But let's remember another Pharaoh. And this one, if you'll move on with me, Dave. Start throwing rocks at you up there. That's back in the book of Genesis. So turn back in Genesis. That's just before Exodus. And this wasn't with Moses, it was with Joseph. And that's about 300-400 years before Moses and what we've been just reading about. And we're going to look at Genesis 41 to begin with. This was a good Pharaoh. He could be troubled in his mind. You know, sometimes, you worry in your mind. You worry if you've done everything. I've come to church, my wife has, while she's cooking dinner, and she's wondered, I wonder if I turned the oven on. Or I wonder if I turned it off. She could be troubled about that. Well, here's what it says in chapter 41 and verse 1. It came to pass that at the end of 2 full years, Pharaoh dreamed. And behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored cows and fat flesh. They were big fat rascals. And they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river. Ugly, lean, stood by the other cows on the brink of the river. And the ugly ones and the lean ones did eat up. They ate up the other cows. What a dream. Did you ever have a wild dream? Sort of scared you? So Pharaoh awoke, and he slept and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up on one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 full ears, and Pharaoh awoke. And behold, it was a dream. You ever done that? You get scared to death in your dream, and you wake up and you think, whew, I've been running all night. Thank goodness that was a dream. It came to pass in this morning, behave yourself, Lydia. Came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof. You can see them there in that picture. There's a bunch of them. In fact, actually that's not true. It was a different picture, which I didn't show you. Pharaoh told them his dream. There was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. He was troubled. You might look at a New Testament passage in John 11 and verse 33. It says, when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, this was Mary. When she came, Lazarus, her brother, had died and was in the grave, and Jesus has come to comfort them. It says, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. He could sympathize with people. You know Max? Max, are you awake over there? You know, your great uncle died, I believe, Friday. And your grandma is pretty sad about that. She grew up with her brother. She's troubled. Can you understand why you'd be troubled too, to see your grandma sad? Well, that's what Jesus was here. It's a good thing to be able to sympathize, to worry about what's right and what's wrong. But in addition, he recognized good things and good people. You might move on, Dave. Yeah, he recognized good and godly things. Look with me in chapter 41, verse 37. You know, Joseph, he gets Joseph to come out and says that all of his interpreters and soothsayers and magicians had tried to explain this goofy dream he had, and they couldn't do it. And finally he finds someone who says, hey, I know somebody who probably can. And that's Joseph. He was in prison at the time. The thing was good. He says, send for Joseph, bring him out here. Let's see if he can do it. The thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my... Oh, excuse me. That's not the passage I wanted. Yeah, that is the passage I wanted. Joseph interprets his dream. Now, I don't have to tell you all about that. You've studied that in Bible class, haven't you? You have. There's going to be 7 good years and 7 bad years, and you need to prepare for it. Well, what's he saying to Joseph? He sees something good in Joseph. Something godly. God's speaking through it. God hath showed thee all this. There's none so discreet and wise as thou art, Joseph. Thou shalt be over my house, and according to thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. Man alive. He took him out of jail and promoted him. Why? Because he saw something good and worthwhile in him. You know, sometimes we meet people like that. Maybe they're poor. Maybe they're in bad shape. Maybe they've been in jail. But you look at them and you talk with them and you see something good in them. Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck and made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all of Egypt. You know, I want you to notice a New Testament passage. This is in Titus 1 in verse 7 beginning. It's talking about the qualifications of an elder. And it says, a bishop must be blameless as the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre, but a lover of hospitality. And I want you to notice this next one. A lover of good men. A lover of good men. The ability to recognize good people and to reward them, to enjoy their company, to try to advance them as far as you can. But in addition, he rejoiced in other people's happiness. You know, some people just can't stand to see other people happy. You know, I've got a bunch of my grandkids on ball teams, and they're playing ball. And you know, one of the things that happens on the ball team, because mom and dad are bragging on you and they're fussing on the coach because he doesn't play you enough and he plays all those other kids instead of you. And then you get jealous. And it gets hard as a youngster for you to see the fellas you're playing with on the team do well, do better than you. It's hard to be happy for them. You're too jealous. So in chapter 45 and verse 1, Joseph's family, his family sold him into Egypt, and he's been strained, been distanced from them, thinks they don't love him, thinks they're evil men. But they come down to Egypt to get grain, and they deal with Joseph without knowing who he is. So in 45:1, Joseph could not refrain himself before all that stood by him, and he cried, "Cause every man to go out from me." And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. And he wept aloud. And the Egyptians, notice this, and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, "I am Joseph. Doth my father still live?" And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, "Come near to me, I pray you." And they came near. And he said, "I am Joseph your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years, in the which there shall be neither earing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and the Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Haste ye, and go up to my father, and say unto him, Thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not. And thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children, thy children's children, and thy flocks, and thy herds, and all that thou hast. And there will I nourish thee. And yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty. Behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth that speaketh to you. And ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and of all that ye have seen. Ye shall haste and bring down my father hither. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them. And after that his brethren talked with him, and the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house. You know, there were other servants and all that listening at the door. And they told Pharaoh, saying, Joseph's brethren are come. And notice, and it pleased Pharaoh well, and his servants. They said, what a wonderful thing. Can you be happy for other people when good things happen to them? Maybe things that don't happen to you. But it's good that it happens to them. That was the kind of Pharaoh this was. He was happy for Joseph. Another point. He was sharing. Pharaoh was. You had a bunch of people moving to town. My goodness. We got to make room for you too. Pharaoh, this is in 47:5. Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, Thy father and thy brethren are coming to thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and brethren to dwell. Wow! Give them the best. You remember Abraham and Lot? You remember what kind of person Abraham was? He said to Lot, we need to separate. You choose where you want to be. In the land of Goshen, let them dwell. And if thou knowest any men of activity among them, make them rulers over my cattle. A couple of New Testament passages. In Ephesians 4, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing that is good. Why? That he may have to give to him that needeth. You know, ladies and gentlemen, many of us are well off. There's just no bones about that. There's many people here making $100,000, $200,000 a year. Why do you have all that? Why has God granted you that? You thought about it? Why had God made this man Pharaoh? It was so he could be good to people. In 2 Corinthians 9, you remember the church in Macedonia had contributed money for the brethren in Judea. The administration of this service not only supplieth the want of the saints, but is abundant by many thanksgivings unto God. Whilst by the experiment of this ministration they glorify God for your professed subjection unto the gospel of Christ, and your liberal distribution unto them and to all men, and by their prayer for you, which long after you for the exceeding grace of God in you. He said, this is a wonderful thing you've done, to be able to give, to be able to share, to be generous with what God's given you. A last point. This Pharaoh received the blessing of Jacob. Now, if you don't remember who Jacob was in the lineage of Jesus. He was special. He was carrying the blessings God had given to Abraham, and that lineage would be carried all the way down to the New Testament. So that when he blessed a man, it meant something. It's in Genesis 47, verse 7. Then Joseph brought in Jacob his father. And that's the picture that you see there. That's Jacob meeting Pharaoh. And stood him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. They have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers and the days of their sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their dependents. This passage calls all of us to humility. This Pharaoh, this king, was blessed by this needy man from Palestine. And one more New Testament passage. In 1 Peter 3, verse 8. Finally, be ye all of one mind, having compassion one of another. Love as brethren. Be pitiful, be courteous, not rendering evil for evil or railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing, knowing that ye are thereunto called, that ye should inherit a blessing. For he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips that they speak no guile. Let him hate evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it, for the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against them that do evil. Who is he that will harm you if you be followers of that which is good? Now think about these two Pharaohs. Which one of them did God love? It was the man who received the blessing of Jacob. It was the man who was sharing and generous. The man who could rejoice in the happiness of others. Who recognized good and godly people. The man who could be troubled in his mind, worrying about his people and his nation and his situation. his family. And not that other king. That other king he brought low. 10 plagues, the last of which was the death of the firstborn, and an army destroyed in the Red Sea. If you're here this morning and not a Christian, you need to figure out what a Christian is and what sort of person you intend to be. Now, once you've figured that out, it's what you want to be, you've got to figure out, what do I do with what I've done? It stuns me. I cannot accept it. I pray nightly, and I cannot accept it. To thank God for all the blessings he's given me, and I don't understand why. To thank him for his forgiveness, and I can't comprehend his goodness. But if you would receive that wonderful blessing, if you would receive that wonderful hope and the forgiveness of your sins, you must accept the gift by believing in him, repenting of your sins, and being baptized. Come while we stand and sing.